These are true stories based on submissions from the BuzzFeed Unsolved Network audience. These are their encounters. When I was 8 years old, I went to Mexico City, specifically the area known as Xochimilco. I had never been outside of Los Angeles, so this was my first time meeting my mom's side of the family. I was especially excited since I was raised on mostly Japanese customs and traditions, and I knew very little about my Mexican heritage. When I arrived, I got to meet all my cousins, some of whom I didn't even know existed. Thankfully, my mother was strict about teaching me Spanish, so I understood the basics and we all had fun playing around for the rest of the day. Fast forward to later that night. We were in our room, 2 queen beds parallel to each other, with my sister and me sharing the one furthest from the window. I didn't know what time it was, but the sound of groaning awoke me. I looked around and saw my sister, who was 3 at the time, sleeping soundly between my mom and dad. I continued to hear the noise, and it sounded like it was coming closer to us. I tiptoed around my parents' bed and tried to find where the sound was coming from. It led me to the closed window facing the street and a river that I could see between 2 other houses. I think I stayed there for about a minute before deciding to be brave and open one side of the window. That's when I saw a female figure emerge from behind the right side of the house. She had long dark hair with something white draped on it and a long white dress that dragged behind her. It sounded like she was crying out something, but I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know how long I stood there, watching as she walked back and forth along the river, but all of a sudden she turned to face my apartment. I quickly ducked below the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat there for a bit, not wanting to wake up my parents. I looked up again, now intrigued by sounds of barking, but this time only peeking slightly over the windowsill. I noticed that the figure was gone, but the lights to the house on the left were now on. I took one last glance at the river, and I saw something that looked like a head, wearing the same white veil I saw earlier on the figure. I didn't know why, but I thought it was staring at me, and knew I was there. I closed the window and crept back to my bed and hid under the covers. I started up my DS to play my Pokemon game since I was now too scared to go to sleep. That's when I saw the date. It was late October, so I thought to myself that whatever I had seen must have been somebody pulling a prank, since it was so close to Halloween. I must have eventually fallen asleep, since I woke up and my DS had run out of battery. I went downstairs and overheard my grandma asking my cousins if they had been outside messing with the neighbor's dog last night, since they were barking like crazy and woke them up. My cousins all denied it, but my grandma didn't believe them. She said that if they were lying and went outside again tonight, La Llorona was going to get them. After she finished with them, I asked one of my cousins what La Llorona was, and they explained to me that she goes along the river crying for her sons. He goes on to explain that the woman wore a wedding gown and a veil, and was known for drowning her kids in a river after she was abandoned by her husband. He assured me that she wasn't real, and only some dumb legend that our grandma used to scare them into not leaving the house at night. At this point, I felt uncomfortable since his description of her was eerily similar to the figure I saw last night, but then I remembered it was almost Halloween. I asked him what he was going to dress up as, and he gave me a confused look. He told me that in Mexico, or at least in that area during that time, they celebrated Dia de los Muertos, which doesn't have the same types of costumes as American Halloween. I visit my family every year now, or at least we try to, but we haven't heard or seen anything ever since. Whatever it was, I hope to never see it again. So I'm pretty skeptical about ghosts and the paranormal. I believe there has to be a reasonable explanation for everything. My friend Veronica, however, is the opposite. She has had paranormal experiences for her entire life and has seen apparitions appear, unlike myself. Although my opinion on ghosts is still pretty strong, something about this event really disturbed me. I was home alone with my little sister when my mother and her boyfriend were out on vacation. I was in bed, just about to go to sleep, before I got a direct message from Veronica. She told me she was terrified, and she had no idea what to do. I immediately got back to her and asked her what was wrong. She explained that she was home alone and she was doing the dishes. She decided to listen to music while doing her chores. She lived in a condominium at the time, and noise could easily pass through the thin walls, so she went upstairs to grab her headphones after wiping the counter off. She then explained that she went back downstairs not 2 minutes later with her headphones, and she noticed something facing downward on the counter she had just cleaned. Whatever it was, Veronica swears it wasn't there before. She had to literally peel it off the counter, then she flipped it over. She told me it was a picture of a man. It looked like the photo had been drawn over in pen, and the sides were ripped. Knowing Veronica, leaving her alone in times like this would not be good, so we decided to meet up halfway. I asked if she had the photo, and she confirmed, assuring me she was holding it tight. I met her at the end of my road, and she looked absolutely terrified. I gave her a hug, and we made our way home, Veronica retelling the story as we walked down the street. When we got home, she pulled out the photo and showed me. I was utterly disturbed by the photo, and the story was now a lot more unnerving. We came to the conclusion that it wasn't drawn on because there was no impressions that the pen would leave behind. It was clearly a part of the photo. We even called Veronica's mother as she was on her way back home that night from work. Her mother picked her up and drove her home. About an hour after she left, Veronica texted me. The photo was of her mother's boyfriend from her teens, who was wearing bad Halloween makeup. That was one big mystery solved. The part that makes no sense is that her mom had torn up the photo years ago and threw it away. The chances of that part of that photo dropping on a newly cleaned counter still confuses and unnerves me to this day. I have lived in my house since I was 2 months old. I live here with my 3 sisters, my mom, my dad, and our uncle. When we first moved in, my aunt, my mom's younger sister who believed she was clairvoyant, said that it was haunted. My parents thought this was ridiculous, but then weird things started happening. When I was a baby, before my 2 younger sisters were born, my older sister and I slept in what we now call the playroom on the 2nd floor. On several occasions, while both my parents were downstairs along with my sister, our cat, and me, they would hear through the baby monitor some of our toys going off. Every time, my dad would go upstairs, and as soon as he would reach the door to the playroom, the toys would stop. He thought it was the batteries dying, so he was constantly changing them out. One day, this happened again, except the toy that was making noise was one that didn't have batteries. You had to push it across the floor for it to make noise. But still, my dad walked upstairs and got to the room, and right as he opened the door, the noise stopped and the toy was on the shelf where it was supposed to be. My parents didn't know what to make of this, so they just moved on. But then a few months later, my mom was woken up in the middle of the night by my older sister Nadia, asking if she could sleep in her bed. When my mom asked why, she said, "I told the girl that lives in my room that she could sleep in my bed because she was sad." My mom was confused, and asked if she was talking about me, who was a baby at the time. Nadia said no, and that it was the little girl that lives in her room. My mom asked what the girl said, and Nadia said, "She didn't say anything. She just looked really sad, so I said she could sleep in my bed and I can come sleep with you." Then she floated up, 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 and away like she always does. Let's just say my mom had trouble sleeping that night. A few years later, after my sisters were born, it was almost Halloween and my parents threw a grown-up party. They had my sisters and me stay at my grandparents' house. That night, one of my parents' friends was sleeping on the bottom bunk of our bunk bed. He woke up in the middle of the night to a little girl in a nightgown with blonde pigtails, just standing there staring at him. He said, "Oh, did you guys come home early? It's really late. Do you need your parents? They're in the room down the hall." She then turned around and left. The next morning, he asked my parents when my sister and I got home, and they looked at him confused and said they're still at their grandparents'. A few months later, the same aunt that told us our house was haunted was left alone in the house one night and saw a young girl in a nightgown with pigtails walking around. She thought it was one of us and we had come home early, but when she followed the girl all the way to the playroom, she disappeared. My aunt was terrified. The creepiest part was the similarities in these stories. My mom never told my aunt about what her friend had seen, but my aunt still described a young girl with blonde pigtails. Years later, I moved into the playroom by myself. I was only there for a few weeks before I moved into Nadia's room because I was too scared to sleep. I felt like I was being watched all the time. Another odd thing that kept happening involved a bundle of sage that was given to us by a friend, which we kept in the drawer in our hallway. Every few weeks when we went to tidy the playroom, we would find it on the windowsill. Last year, Nadia got a Ouija board, and we decided to use it in the playroom. We started the game, and right away I felt unwanted. I felt extremely uncomfortable, and I ended up having to leave the room. Afterwards, my sister explained that in the game they talked to the little ghost girl. We found out her name was Madison, and she used to live in our house. She was 4 years old when she died. We did some research on our house and we couldn't really find anything about a girl named Madison, but the house did used to be a family home that was passed from daughter to daughter. Oddly enough, all the previous owners had 4 daughters. We think that at some point Madison came here and stayed for a few months, but got sick and died. She may not have died in the house, but if she considered this house home, it would explain why she is here. We haven't really seen a lot of activity from her lately. Just the usual tapping, knocking, and small objects being moved around.